Welcome back to Stinging Back. I'm M. This is the podcast that digs deep into the deceptive practices behind online sting operations and the devastating impact they've had on real lives. During an investigation and trial, there are constitutional rights in place to ensure you receive a fair process. Most importantly, the Fifth Amendment, which protects against self-incrimination and guarantees due process, and the 14th Amendment, which ensures equal protection under the law and that no one is deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. Now, here on Stinging Back, we don't share the cases where those rights are respected. We share the stories where law enforcement and prosecutors actively strip those rights away through deceptive tactics, evidence suppression, coercion, entrapment, and misuse of public platforms to manufacture crimes rather than prevent them. These are systemic violations, not one-off mistakes. Again, I'm joined by A, and we have a guest, P, with us today.
Hi, I'm A, and today we're joined by someone who brings not just personal insight, but a powerful perspective on criminal justice and the very real cost of mass incarceration for crimes with no actual victims. Welcome, P. We're so glad to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having me. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
All right, we're going to go into a little philosophy. Libertarianism, often misunderstood, actually organized in the early 19th century, France. But modern libertarian thought centers on the non-aggressive principle. If you're not harming anyone, their property, or violating a contract, then you're not committing a crime.
Which begs the question, where are the libertarian voices when it comes to these sting operations? These are government manufactured crimes. No real harm, no real victim, yet people are getting locked up for decades.
Exactly. And I've had this conversation with some of my libertarian friends. And while I'm not particularly as you would call, like an American libertarian, I would be more of the French left origination of libertarianism, which focuses mostly on individual freedoms, social equity, and critique of corporate power. That's kind of where I place myself. But when I talk to my friends who are libertarian leaning, and I think most people have that libertarian streak in them, like we all want the most freedom for the most amount of people. When you explain it, they're government manufactured crimes, and you show them the facts, how the government is basically criminalizing thought, fantasy, and bad judgment, one could argue, they understand that this is just like a textbook state overreach and has no right to be in existence.
So let's talk about what libertarianism is. So it's a political philosophy that emphasizes individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. At its core, libertarianism holds that people should be free to live as they choose, so long as they don't infringe on the rights of others.
I was going to say, it's kind of the golden rule philosophy. It's the do unto others as you would have others do unto you. You do you, I'll do me. That's the base philosophy.
That makes sense.
So some of the core principles like individual liberty and then limited government with free markets, non-aggression principle, which means initiating force, fraud, or coercion against others is morally wrong. And then the personal responsibility, individuals are responsible for the consequences of their actions.
And so in American politics, the Libertarian Party will typically oppose like the war on drugs. And as we're seeing now, this is the war on sex. That's why we're questioning, where are they? Why aren't they standing up and speaking out against these sting operations that are unconstitutional? But of course, our government's not admitting to that, at least not yet. The Libertarian Party will also be against like the mass surveillance, military intervention abroad, high taxes and regulations, and other things such as gun control laws.
Yeah, it's a very hands-off philosophy as it's evolved in the Americas. Really, where the focus needs to be with libertarian principles is the non-aggression principle and like maximizing freedom for the most amount of people. And that's kind of where the left libertarianism got its start in France in the 1800s, when we're talking about, great societal upheaval in terms of French Revolution and high concentration of power, with the elites being used to, keep down the mass.
How does that compare to the conservatives and the progressives?
The thing that I think you see a lot of, the polarization in America is obviously a topic that you could turn on basically any podcast and hear about. I think my view of libertarianism tends to fall more along progressive lines, because the progressive cause is for like an equal opportunity for everybody to succeed, maximizing freedom by maximizing everybody's outcome. And so like with progressives, it's pretty easy to have this discussion about government entrapment and how, it's really feeding the prison industrial complex and the criminal industrial complex with victimless crimes, such as mine. And if you wouldn't mind, could I give a little background on mine so people know where I'm coming from?
Yes, of course.
So my alleged crime occurred with, of course, no victim. I was on a website that I've used for role playing in the past, text-based role playing, and I was shown a picture of an adult who used a de-aging AI on the face. Now, we'll come back to use of AI later because it does get scary. But so you're given this, the age was of age. So I'm assuming, just like any rational person does on an anonymous internet website, that the person I'm talking to is an adult. So I continued. I never went to meet up when this person tried to get me to go meet up. I said, no, of course not. But little did I know, I was on the phone I was texting with ICAC. And a week later, they rolled up and they arrested me again for a crime with no victim, for a crime where I very clearly did not think I was talking to a minor, or else I would have gone to meet this minor, for a crime where I literally did not leave the house. And I was still arrested, and I was forced to plead guilty, basically, or else go to prison for 10 years.
And to be clear, P is a sting operation victim. We didn't mention that before. That is what he's talking about. And when he says ICAC, that is when he said I didn't realize I was speaking to ICAC. That is the Internet Crimes Against Children program. And that was an ICAC task force that was conducting an online sting operation that is supposed to be about targeting those who are seeking minors online to prevent the exploitation of children. But as P explained, this sting operation was not about targeting anybody who was seeking minors online. It was about targeting men who were seeking consensual, casual encounters from other consensual adults. And he's one that got dragged into that. And of course, because it is an abnormal situation, it creates there is no such thing as a normal response to an abnormal situation. No matter how much they tell you that there is a normal response to it, if you truly believe that 13 and 14-year-olds are going online to these adult platforms to solicit men for sex, then I think, if you come across that situation and you don't think there's anything abnormal about that, then there might be something wrong with you mentally if you have that mentality about kids that age, because that's just not a normal behavior for a 13 or 14-year-old. And then especially when you see these decoys have the sexual maturity and sexual confidence of an adult man who uses these platforms to seek casual encounters. For example, P, how old were you when this happened to you?
I was 39 when this happened to me.
And would you say that the decoy was behaving more like someone your age?
Oh, certainly. There was never any question in my mind that I was speaking to an adult. From running the number and seeing that, like, they were using, for example, like they were using pictures of a white adult that used a face de-ager for AI, and then their number belonged to a black, when it was Google, the number belonged to a black one. Like, it was very obvious at every point. Like, I did checks to make sure that, this is an adult. And even that wasn't enough. So it was, and the way that they were talking was obviously not that I have experience with how teenagers talk. So, it's been a while since I've been a teenager, not to date myself here. But no, I would imagine there's no 13 and 14-year-old that is having a conversation like that. And to my knowledge, and you're more of an expert in this, so you could probably answer this question better than I could, but it seems like the ITAC task force, all these organizations haven't really provided concrete proof that there is this giant rash of 13, 14, 12-year-olds, what have you, seeking encounters online. We're just supposed to accept that is happening.
Well, nobody's ever seen them or found them. They just keep telling us that they do exist. My problem with this is that these decoys, these people that conduct these sting operations who keep telling us that they do exist and that there are children who supposedly do this, my problem with them is that they seem to have the exact same mentality of those who have actually done the real stuff to actual minors. It's like they justify that the minors wanted to do this. And when they're presenting these situations saying, oh, no, yes, there are, 13, 14, even 12-year-olds out there aggressively seeking, this with adult random strangers. To me, that shows that they have the same mentality that those who have actually hurt or harmed a minor in this way and then justified it by saying, but this minor wanted to do this. That's the same mentality. So to me, that's telling us a lot more about them than it is about the men they are targeting who were clearly not seeking minors for this. They're putting that in the heads of other men, trying to make other men think about it, and then turning around and falsely accusing those other men of trying to sexually harm minors.
We keep using the term projecting, and I think that's what they're doing.
And remember, they're supposed to be using the funding to prevent actual harm to real children online. And that's not at all what they're doing. And we'll move on here in a bit and talk about the cost of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I have to look at this whole situation through like a humorous lens. Otherwise, I think, and that's my advice to anybody going through this, is you got to try to laugh a little bit. Otherwise, you will drive yourself crazy. But it's very like high school. And I remember in high school and middle school behavior, like when you would, you'd write down ICUP on a piece of paper and you get your friend to read it. And oh, ha, 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 he said it. But that's what's happening here. And it's causing convictions, right? Like that's what they're trying to do. They're basically trying to bait you into saying something. And as soon as you say something, because you are held to your word, as soon as you say something that could be remotely construed, and if you read these statutes, they are so broad that an Instagram comment could technically qualify as a solicitation if they wanted to make that stick. Like they could do that. And as soon as they say it, it's like, ooh, I got you. And then they literally just drop a bomb on your reputation and your life as you knew it is over.
Yeah, and it's crazy because what they use, and they keep saying over and over again, well, you were told this was a 14-year-old. And they conveniently ignore the fact that you were first shown that this was someone who was seeking a man to meet for sexual purposes. They leave that part out. They just put the focus on, oh, but you were told this was a 14-year-old. Well, you could have been told that this was a talking cat, and the conversation would have still gone the same, because they can choose to be whoever and whatever they want to be. And that's the part that's not being presented to the courts and to the juries. You could have been told, I'm a talking cat and I want to meet you for sex. And you would have very likely still played along with that. And that would not have been a crime because our government has not criminalized that yet. Maybe eventually they will.
Yeah, say, but they're working on it, I'm sure.
Yeah, and they'll say you were trying to abuse an animal. We talked about that in our last episode. They could have said, I'm a mummified corpse and I'm wanting to meet you for sex. And, the government can make that a crime and say you were trying to abuse a corpse. That's basically what they're doing here. They are presenting a fantasy so far disconnected from reality that it has never happened in real life before or is likely to ever happen in real life before. And then they are criminalizing the men for playing along with that fantasy that is the fantasy of the decoy, not the man who was arrested for it. And like I said in the last episode, I think those who are creating these fantasies and using them to promote and encourage, this type of abuse, because of course, they've straight out admitted that they want the men to believe that this is a real minor, seeking them out for sex. I think if anybody presents a real danger to children, it's them, because they have shown us what is on their mind and how they think about children. Don't you think?
Well, certainly, it's worrying that we've got just hundreds. I mean, in the case of my arrest, there were well over 100 officers doing this. That is just an insane thought to me that you've got 140, 150 officers all sitting around just texting people on their phones, trying to get them to commit crimes. You're paying for that too, by the way. That's overtime. They're working weekends and they're getting paid 24 hours a day, all 3 days of that weekend.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how much it's costing the American taxpayers for these grown men to sit around creating fantasies about children where they are sexualizing the children and then going around pushing these fantasies on men who were not looking for that and basically promoting and encouraging the very abuse that they claim to be preventing. Let's talk about those costs. What is it costing us, P?
Yeah. And I think that is what really opens a lot of people's, you had mentioned before, the divide between, a conservative and a progressive. And I think when talking to people in general, but mostly someone who would self-identify as a fiscal conservative, that's what really opens their eyes, in addition to the government overreach, is just the absurd amount of money. Because one figure that I saw quoted was that, well, an arrest only, and I believe this was out of New York, was that an arrest only costs $4,500 when they're doing this. So it's a cheap way to do it. So it makes sense to do it. But that's a lie. And this is just lying with statistics because, okay, maybe that cop got paid $4,500 for that whole weekend, which is a lot of money for a weekend, by the way. But what they're conveniently leaving out is that, it doesn't just end at the arrest, right? You got to keep this person who was arrested somewhere. We're going to imprison them. And in the United States, we have the prison industrial complex. Prison is big business in the United States, to the tune of an average of $65,000 a year to imprison a person in the United States. And that's a national mean figure that I'm taking. So your state could be less, your state could be more. I encourage you to look it up in your state and do the math along with me because it gets crazier. So for one person, it's going to cost you $65,000 per year, but you're not just getting a year in jail, right? Most of these pleas end up being something like 10 years if you're taking the plea deal. And you're going to take the plea deal because the other option is 20 to 25 years in jail for a lot of these people who are going to the meets where they're charging you with attempted rape of a minor. So if we take an average 10-year plea deal and we multiply that by $65,000, you can do the math with me, you attach that zero, it costs $650,000 on average in the United States, and this is just prison costs alone, to keep a person locked up for that 10-year sentence. But if these things were just catching one person at a time, they wouldn't be that great and they would probably abandon them. No, these things are hauling in 10, 50. We just saw something out of California that I believe was shared that was 250 something people who are arrested. So let's take that low end and now say in this sting over the weekend, 10 people were arrested. Well, we know that it costs $650,000 on average to imprison one person for a 10-year sentence. Now you have 10 people taking that exact same plea deal for 10 years. And now that is $6,500,000 over 10 years for every 10 people arrested that way. So the sting doesn't cost $4,500. The sting costs orders of magnitude more, to the tune of $6,500,000 per 10 people on average. Oh, and by the way, inflation is always going up. The cost to imprison people is always going up. That number is always going up.
And that's all out of our pockets.
Yes, no real child either. The victimless crime, you just paid over $6 million to imprison them.
And protected no children at all, while the real children are still being targeted online by the real predators who these sting operations do not target at all.
In different places, not even on the adult sites. The children that are being harmed on places that the children frequently go. Minecraft, Roblox.
And that's not even all the cost.
Yeah, didn't we just there's stories that are now coming out that finally that it seems like the FBI is starting to go after some of that stuff, but this has been going on for years and years and years. And they're finally starting to do it after, kids are, getting hurt and injured. So where's the proactiveness there? Because you're not saving any kids by going after people like me who, again, didn't leave the house under the impression that they were talking to an adult. You're not saving anybody.
I find it interesting that it's the FBI working the real cases instead of the Internet Crimes Against Children program, because the ICAC task forces are the ones receiving millions of dollars to work these cases, yet they're too busy creating the fake cases. And whenever there is a real case like the sextortion cases, when we hear about those, it's typically the FBI working those. So that's really interesting. So, P, and even more so than what you just told us about the cost of incarcerating people, what about there's additional costs after they're released from prison as well. So what about those costs? Can you tell us about that?
Right. I mean, a lot of states, and most states, they're not just going to release this dangerous sex offender out into the wild with no supervision. So most states, you're going to get out and you're going to have a period of either parole if you're coming out of prison, or if you did not, like lucky enough like me to get a plea deal where you avoided a prison sentence, you'll be on probation. But that means you're being supervised. And the cost of supervising people post-release is going to vary based on where they land on like the offense registry, which we'll get to. But we could be talking GPS monitoring, a mandatory sex offender treatment program, which in a lot of states takes upwards of a year to complete. Mandatory check-ins with your probation officer. The cost of supervision in many states can range between $5,000 and $15,000 per person per year. And in certain places where you're on parole supervision for life, which are a lot of states, that is for the rest of their life. So that's an additional $15,000 per year for the rest of your life that you are paying out of your tax dollars for people who didn't do anything.
Plus, you have to account for the sex offender registry. In states like California and Florida, maintaining the registry, which includes tech infrastructure, staffing enforcement, and compliance checks, that costs taxpayers tens of millions annually. Some estimates put the national cost at over $1 billion a year to operate all state registries. That's a lot of money.
That is just an insane amount of money.
On crimes that would have never existed had the government not created them.
Yeah, but I guess somebody needed a paycheck, right? Like it is wild though when you think about how you compare how much money we spend, and it's been said to death by, people much more educated than I am. But you compare how much we spend on incarceration and criminalization in this country and just manufacturing crimes out of whole cloth. Compare that to the amount your county spends on education. Compare that to the amount your county spends on, or your state spends on its pension programs for its state workers, Medicaid, Medicare. Compare that to the amount we spend on Social Security per person for our elderly who have given their lives to work for this country and better this country. And it is just, it's stunning. I mean, just to imprison somebody, we go back to that $65,000 number. That's more than most four-year universities. Well, I should say more than 1 year at most four-year universities. That's more than childcare. That is way more than we spend even in our highest spending state per person, per child for education. And you're telling me we couldn't spend this $60-some thousand differently? I mean, I don't know. It is just built to punish us.
Yeah, it's based on a fantasy that the government created where they sexualize children and then they use that to fearmonger and have gotten the American public to spend millions and billions of dollars on this fantasy. And then we wonder why our government cannot figure out how to bring down the national debt. Isn't it interesting how they're not even looking in this direction?
Oh no, and I love that word fearmonger too, because it is so much about so much of American politics can be just encapsulated in that one word. And I'm so glad you used it because that's exactly what this is. It is fear mongering, and it's fear mongering and it's grandstanding. It allows prosecutors and task forces to grandstand about how many children they saved, but trafficking numbers continue to go up and up and up because our government wants to ignore areas where it's really where they could be really spending this money to help. But it's fear mongering because now we talk about the punishment, we talk about the registry. Now your face gets put online for everybody to see, and everybody gets to think you're this violent sexual predator when you're not. Because the punishment, God forbid, the punishment stops at prison in the carceral state. But someone in certain states, well, in almost every state, I would imagine you're required to register for this. The registry itself is a whole nother topic, and it's a whole nother animal that when you really delve into is another piece of just wonderful insanity that this country has come up with. But I'm going to use an example from a state. And so for my crime, I'm using my crime as a baseline. And we keep in mind, I never went to travel to meet anybody. I was under the impression I was talking to an adult the entire time. So there was no victim, no harm was done. I am required to register as a tier 3 offender. And if you don't know, that is the highest level of offender that there is. That is a lifetime registration. My name will never come off of the registry. For the rest of my life, whenever employers do a background check, that's popping up. But the thing that is, again, it's one of those things you have to laugh at a little bit. Otherwise, you'll drive yourself crazy. In the very same state I was convicted, I could have been a tier 1 sex offender if I had engaged in commercial sex trafficking, if I had engaged in sexual battery. And by the way, to get on tier 1 for sexual battery, you have to have engaged in 3 or more counts of it. So it's okay to do it twice. That third time, we're going to put you on the list.
If you had a real victim, if you had harmed an actual minor, your punishment would be less than what it is for being caught in a sting operation that sexualized children and pushed that on you.
Yes, that is correct. You brand people for life.
And most people don't realize that. Most of the American public does not realize that this is what is happening, that had you had a real victim cause real harm to a real person, a real minor, your punishment would have been less than what your punishment is when you are caught in a sting operation and convicted of a crime that would have never happened in real life. We spent millions of dollars on this. We've put thousands of men on the sex offender registry because of this. The government has put your life at risk. Our government has made you a target of those extremists who are looking for any excuse they can find to justify violence. And many of our group members have dealt with those crazies that want to, justify being evil and violent. And, we get attacked by trolls online all the time that tell us we don't deserve to live because we are either a pedo or a pedo defender. And people don't realize, how evil what the government has done to thousands of men and their families truly is. These sting operations don't protect anybody. They harm people.
I mean, and it's like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, because on every sex offender registry website, and they're all run individually by states, it is a crime to use information on the registry. I believe it's a felony offense to use information on the registry to harass people. But that's such like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge thing, because there are crazies out there. Everybody knows there are crazies out there. The proper term for it would be stochastic violence, where it's someone who is you're not saying, hey, go out and hurt person X, but I'm going to give you their name, their address, and all this information that they did, knowing that there are crazies out there who want to act on it, And then we're just going to say, yeah, go ahead. And then we're going to wash our hands and say, well, we're not trying to encourage vigilante violence.
No, we're just calling innocent people child predators and putting your faces out there and your names and your addresses so that these crazies can justify, being violent, finding someone to be violent with, because that's what they do. And the government takes
Yeah.
no responsibility for what they have done. And like we were saying earlier, in some of these states, these guys that have been falsely accused of this are on lifetime supervision and are, on the registry for life, whereas, many others that committed a real crime are not. The ones that commit the actual hands-on abuse.
Yeah, and it's that actual hands-on abuse, they will face a lighter sentence. So I will give another example. And the day I accepted my plea deal, I went to court, and there were, I believe, 3 other cases. And I don't know if they were related. One of them I know for a fact wasn't related to the sting, who were also accepting plea deals at the time. So again, keeping in mind that I never traveled anywhere, I didn't do anything. There was no victim. I never left my house. There were no images exchanged, nothing like that. My plea deal ends up being 2 years of probation. So someone else pled for 10 years, same type of thing. They had left their house. A third person was pleading guilty to rape of a minor, or whatever the term is. And the person was a 14-year-old. This person had picked them up, and they had sex and all that, and they were admitting to that. So this person, who had actually raped a minor, was sentenced to 4 years in prison. The person who had traveled to meet the fake victim, no harm, no foul, nothing was done, that person was sentenced to 10 years in prison.
And some of them will be sentenced to even more time, because they straight out say, I did not believe it was a minor. I knew this was an adult, and they get convicted anyway. And because they are supposedly in denial, because you're supposed to know that 14-year-olds, want to have sex with strangers, and they will aggressively solicit you online for this. Shame on you for not knowing that and not accepting that. Therefore, we're going to give you more time for not accepting, that this is real. And so some of those guys have gotten more time added to the 10 years because of that, because they point out how ridiculous this is. And judges don't like to hear that. They call it, being in denial and not taking accountability for your actions.
It's forcing people to engage in this game of pretend and this abstraction. We all know that it's not a real person on the other end, but we have to all pretend that it is. And I think the first time we talked, I brought up the analogy, and it's an analogy I bring up. You get those texts from Amazon on your phone saying that a package was delivered in your name, or you get the text I just got a text from my bank saying that someone had just withdrawn, $900 to buy tickets on StubHub.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that? Am I supposed to believe that now? Do we believe everything that's on the internet? Do I believe the Nigerian prince really does have millions and millions of dollars for me if only I give them my bank routing number? It's absurd. You would not believe anything else you see on the internet. It's common internet safety to not believe anonymous random messages on the internet. But for some reason with this, that all goes out the window.
Yeah, and what I do believe is that our government can very well start criminalizing not believing those scammers as well. They can just like they have criminalized this, they can very easily say, well, you knew that this was real and you did not respond to them properly, therefore you are guilty. At this point, they can criminalize anything they want, and it's insane. But I think the real goal, other than money and to fearmonger, is there seems to be this big push for, let's get as many people on the sex offender registry as we can. I don't fully understand exactly why they want or need that. I'm sure there's money tied to that. I think it has to do with control. But we know that the registry is not about safety, it's punishment. And some of them, like we said, are, lifetime monitoring. Um, it restricts their employment opportunities, housing opportunities. They're socially isolated. And remember, this is all for something that never happened or could have ever happened in real life. But our government continues to justify it. And I think most people just have not paid enough attention to know that this is what our government is doing. And this is why we're here, to inform people about this.
Yeah, and that's another. I'm very open about this with people because at this point, like my face is everywhere. I was in a very public facing role before this happened. So like, it's not like I'm keeping this a great big secret. So I've had a lot of conversations, and the common refrain is like, how is this even possible? Like, I didn't know that this was going on. This is insane. Like, and it's hard for me to explain how, because really the answer is it's happening because we let it happen. And that we live in a democracy, a representative democracy. And at a certain point in time, we have to take responsibility for electing the types of people who would enact these laws, and not only enact these laws, because I do believe genuinely that there were some good intentions behind this stuff. Like I'm sure, like I know where Megan's Law originated in New Jersey, that was in response to the rape of, I believe, like an 8-year-old. Like there was a good intention behind this, but it's now being shown that it's just turned into this giant, like, overreach program that is criminalizing literally anybody for doing nothing. And the registry itself is now over 1 million people nationwide. And if you're telling me there's over 1 million sex offenders in the United States, like I do not believe you. I just don't believe you.
I do believe that there are so many people with good intentions, and those are like the ones who are donating to these causes, believing that that law enforcement and other vigilante groups are truly trying to catch real predators who are a real risk or danger to children. So it's not their fault, uh, even though they are contributing to this. They just don't realize it. They've been gaslit like the rest of us,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
those people just truly don't know or understand what is happening. The really evil ones are the ones who created these fantasies where they sexualize the children, and the ones that direct the sting operations. And it's clear that these fantasies were created by sexually mature, experienced men. Even when the decoy is a female,
Yeah.
that decoy is being directed by an adult man. The questions, everything, the way it's designed, it all comes from adult men projecting their own fantasies about this onto an imaginary minor that they fantasized being this way. And there's just no real minor that behaves that way. It just
Yeah. I
isn't.
mean, it's wild. And, like I was talking to a friend recently and he was talking about how he goes along with those scammers. And because like you'll see on YouTube, I don't know if anybody in the audience watches some of those scam baiters on YouTube.
I
It's
do.
very funny to watch. They're like the guy. There's some great big channels that are actually doing like decent work with AI to really go after these scammers. But he's talking about how he goes after them. And I started talking to him. I was like, man, I'm not telling you how to live your life. Because I certainly do it too. Like, if someone's trying to troll me, I'm going to try to troll them back. But like, I don't do it anymore because like, you never know now who's on the other end and what they're trying to get you to say. So if you're going along with somebody just to agree with them and just to troll them back and waste their time, well, you could be committing a crime.
That is a
And
really good
again,
point. That is a really good point you're bringing up, because I enjoy playing along with them too, and I play along with them all the time. But that is a really good point that now our government is starting to criminalize, playing along with somebody else's scam and someone else's fantasy. And I hadn't thought about it that way, P. So that's a really good, important point to point out.
yeah, and it is so easy to end up on the registry. Like, even if it's, oh my God, I could do hours on this stuff that I have learned. And I'm just a person who loves to learn. So, it's on my PO is basically like, well, now you got skin in the game, so you kind of have to learn. And we were joking about it. But just the ways that you can end up on these registries, not only with this, but other victimless crimes. Like, again, I was joking with a friend. We were out we were out hiking in the woods and it was raining. And he says, I'm going to change as soon as I get back to my car. And I said, buddy, I might have to teach you the secret handshake if you do that in the parking lot. You got to be careful because you can end up for indecent exposure for that. And you're on the sex offender registry. If you pee in the woods, congrats, you're a sex offender.
Yeah, I could be on the list because I have changed in the car before. If anybody had ever seen me do that, then I'm a sex offender.
That's indecent exposure, you horrible sex offender.
Yes, remember in high school, being at a party and you're hanging out outside and you have to go pee, so you're just going to go over here behind the bush and go pee, or you're out hiking or something. You just go behind this big rock over here and you're going to go, potty. Now you're a sex offender if somebody sees you and reports you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because there could have been children around that could have seen that. I mean, they'll turn it into anything and whatever they want it to be.
That's what it is. It's Maud Flanders. Won't somebody please, if anybody's ever seen The Simpsons, won't somebody please think of the children? That's what we've turned into in this country. Just a society of people who are just so eager to clutch their pearls and point the finger at somebody else for a mistake or a thought crime or like an innocent thought that they had. And it's really to our detriment because there is a bigger concern on the horizon that doesn't just affect people who are on the sex offender registry. And that's the use of AI agents in general to bait people into political or criminal speech online, which is something that is being advanced very rapidly. And the government is trying to halt all state legislation on artificial intelligence for 5 years. So your government can now push out an AI agent and bait you into saying something politically questionable by the regime. And congrats, now you're a terrorist. And you're on a whole different kind of list.
Heck, we might get labeled that just for speaking out about this. If the government doesn't like us speaking out about this, they can, easily create something against us to punish us for it, because how dare we speak out against the government?
Yeah, and it's the idea, it just sounds dystopian, but it's happening.
It is. Okay, because this episode is pretty long, we decided that we are going to break it up into 2 parts. So today's episode is the first part of this long episode, and next week we will put out the second part to this. So stay tuned to listen to part 2 next week. Don't forget to check out the Lady Justice Smith blog at ladyjusticesmith.blog, and also watch the ICAC Unpack on YouTube, and that's for deeper dives into these sting operations. Also, we encourage you to join our community on Facebook at United Citizens Against Government Entrapment US. That's spelled UNCAGEUS. And don't miss the new YouTube channel, Just Played, JESTPLAYED. And that's someone else that is also putting out information about these sting operations, and he does it in a creative way. And also don't forget to check out the Substack, The True Cost of Proactive Online Child Sex Stings, for investigations, data, and insider analysis. We will put out links to those in the description to this episode. Thank you for listening, and remember to spread the word and challenge what you think you know. Stay aware, stay informed, and always keep stinging back.